Hello everyone, welcome back. Today we're going to be continuing on our Python series, but in particular we're going to be taking a look at more the basics of Python. And in this particular lecture, we're going to take a look at more about import as well as more about functions. So I'm going to teach you guys and show you guys how we can work with import and using some of the techniques to modify our code for import to make it more concise, for example. And then also later on, we're going to take a look at how we can work with functions and kind of analyzing how we can work with the parameters inside a function. So with that being said, let's get into it. All right, so the first thing I said, as I mentioned, was we're going to work with import. And in this lecture, I'm going to be taking statistics as our example here. So first things first, if you want to use import, how do we write it out? So for example, I want to use statistics, correct? How am I going to use it? So the first thing that we need to do is to, of course, import statistics. And how we write it out is just import statistics. That's it. Whatever library, whatever module you're going to import, all you have to write out is the import statement, followed by, of course, the whatever module or whatever library you're going to import. It could be math, it could be range, and of course statistics in this example. Now, what I want to do here is that we'll try to use an attribute of statistics to carry out a particular task. Now, some of the attributes of statistics are mean, median, range. So if you're familiar with statistics, mean, median, range, those are of course familiar terms. And also with kind of what's neat with statistics here is that we're just going to use those terms exactly as they are to kind of carry out the operations that we would expect, to find the mean of a list, to find the mean of a certain sequence of values, the median of a sequence of values, the range, and so on. So how do you write this out though? So all we do here is that we say statistics dot, because we're using an attribute, right? Statistics dot mean of. And keep in mind that when you want to use or create a sequence of values, and then we want to compute that using this attribute mean, for instance, we have to create a list. And how we do that is using a brackets. So statistics.mean, we put the brackets in there, and then we put the values. So we can say 9, 10, 12, 14, and 5. Totally whatever you want. I just use random values here. So if we run this and then we see what our output is, statistics.mean gives us a value of 10. So of course you can double check the values if the mean is 10, which I assume it should be correct. But again, all we're doing here is that after we imported statistics, we're using the module library name followed by its attribute using dot. And then we're passing in those values as a parameter. And of course, for example, you could already have declared the list of values with a variable. So for example, I could have said my list is equal to this, again, sequence of values. And then all I could have done here was statistics.mean of my list, which is the variable that contains these values, right? Would still return the same thing. Now, I also wanted to take a look at some special syntax that we can use in terms of import to make our code more concise. So I'm going to show you guys an example of this. For instance, let's say that I want to import mean from statistics to make this more concise. I don't have to use statistics dot. So how I do that here is that I say from statistics, that module that we imported, statistics import mean. Then after I do that, all I can say is mean and then pass in those values. So if I do that, there you go. So a cool thing about Python here is that, especially with using import, after you import the module library, you can use from that library, you can import a specific attribute. So again, I use mean, but you could also say median, range, and then you don't have to use statistics dot and then whatever to carry out the operation. All I did here was that I just used the attribute's name by itself, and then I put in those values as the parameter and computed the value, which was 10, of course. So that is a really cool way of how to use import especially to make your code more concise and easy to read. Now, another example with this comment, as you can see, is that I could name statistics whatever I want. So it could be named something else, and it would still be able to carry out the functions of the library module name. It could be, again, whatever I want the name to be, and then it would still carry out the mean, median, and range of the sequence of values. So I would write this as import statistics as args. Again, you can name this literally whatever you want. You can even write out your name and you would still be able to carry out the function, which is actually pretty cool. So if I set this import statistics as args, I could say args.mean and then copy those values there. There you go, 10. Pretty neat, I think. So the point to this was, again, to make your code more easier for you to read, especially if you wanted to name this statistics whatever you want, easier to use, and of course it's also more fun to use, in my opinion, when you use this kind of special syntax here. But again, these two techniques definitely will make your code much more concise and as well as easier to read, as I mentioned. So again, we use, in this case, I imported a specific attribute so that we didn't have to use statistics dot and then put in those values there. And then with this technique, I said that we could use import and name the import library that we used as anything we wanted, which I used args, and then we carried out the operation, which still gave us the same value. Okay, now on to the second half of the lecture. We're going to take a look at functions and especially how to use them with explicit parameters. So first things first, of course, how do we create a function? What is the syntax? What is the keywords we need to put in order to, of course, declare a function and then carry out its operation? Def is the keyword here. And I really like to think of def as define, because that's what we're going to do here. We're going to define a function. So keep in mind that we need to put def, and then you can name the function whatever you want. This is the name of your function, and I put sux. Totally random name again. And then your parameters. And in this case, again, I said that I wanted to use explicit parameters. So I'm defining what those parameters are already inside the function here. So you could have, for example, I'll say fux is equal to 10, and then sux is equal to 9. Those are my explicit parameters, followed by a colon. Okay, now what I want to do here for this example, I'm going to take a list of values. And let's see, hopefully, I think I can use my list. So I'll take my list here, and then I'm going to traverse through those values and then add each of these values that I declared here, fux and sux, with a condition. So I know I kind of said a lot there, but I'll show you guys what I mean. So I'm going to say, of course, for, I should have said this actually first before, but I'm going to, again, traverse through the values of my list here. So I'm going to traverse through the values of my list, and how I'm going to do that is that I'm going to use a for loop. And I'm going to say for I, you can name this, again, whatever value you want. So I'm going to say for I in range 0 to the length of my list. I'm going to say if my list at index I is greater than, let's say, greater than 10, my list at index I will be added to fux. Else, my list at index I will be added to sux. And then after that, I want to return my list. Let's kind of break it down here. So what I did here was I put a for loop, right? I said for I in range of these values. So it's going to be from 0 to the length of my list. So the built-in len is just going to say that it's just the length of my list, how many values I have, which here, if I go back here, it's the same values as these, but I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 values. So this length of my list here would be 5, so 0 to 5. Now this is also important to consider. Every time we use something in range from one attribute of values to another, this upper bound here is actually not included. It's up to. So of course I said here was 0 to 5, correct? But actually it's 0 to 4. So think of this as the length of my list or whatever upper bound you have. For example, if I put 0 to 6 here, it would actually be from 0 to 5. But if I had, for example, 0 to 7, it would be 0 to 6. 0 to 8, it would only go from up to 7. So keep in mind that although I have 0 to 5, this length of my list takes in 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 values. It's actually going to be 0 to 4. Or I will become 4, but it will only go up to 5. Just keep that in mind. All right, now the next thing I said here was that I put in a conditional statement. And this conditional statement is checking after I go through I. For example, if I go through this index I, for example, I say from my list at index 0, 1, 2, which would be 12, if that's greater than 10, then I'm saying that whatever value I have at that index, I'm going to add it to Fuchs, which is 10. Otherwise, if that is not true, if that is not correct, I'm just going to add that value to Sux, which is 9. After all of that, I'm going to return my list. So let's run this code, and then I'm going to, of course, pass in my values, and then we'll see how all of this actually functions. And let me put a cell, insert cell below. So I'll say Sux, and then I'll put in those values that we had here, which was Fuchs and Sux, which were 10 and 9. And there you go. For example, so you see here that I have 18, 19, 22, 24, 14. So of course, the values I had in my list here are modified according to the conditions I put here. Let's say, for example, we had 9 at our first index value. And keep in mind with lists, you always start at the first index value will be 0. So 9 will be at index 0, 10 will be at 1, 12 will be at 2, 14 will be at 3, and 5 will be at 4. That's also kind of a weird thing about Python, working with Python, but keep in mind that the first value here is at index 0 and then it moves on forward. So I had again, so my list at index 0, if we say I is 0, it would be 9, right? And 9 is not greater than 10. So what I did here was that I said I want to add that to Sux if that's not true. So 9 plus 9 is 18. There you go. For example, let's take 24 here. 24 was at index 0, 1, 2, 3. If we go back to our list value, 0, 1, 2, 3 was 14. So my list at index I, 14 is greater than 10. Okay. Since that's true, I'm going to add it to 10. So 14 plus 10, we get 24. So that's kind of neat. With functions, you can see here that we can modify a variable, first of all, but we can also put any condition we want. And that was the purpose of showing guys, of course, we can put any condition we want inside of the function's expression and also work with parameters. And Fuchs and Sux were my parameters, right? According to these parameters, I modified the values in my list. Now, in this very last comment, I also said that if we do indicate the value of the parameters inside the function itself, it can be overwritten. So you saw here that inside of Sux, the function Sux, I put in the same values I had declared inside the function itself, right? So I had Fuchs at 10, Sux at 9, and I put 10 and 9 here. Again, these were the previous values, right? 18, 19, 20, 24, 14 after we declared in our parameters, in our parameter of Sux with 10 and 9. But if I change those values to, let's say, 9 and 10, if I just switch those, completely changed. So completely changed from the previous parameters we had. And the reason being is that explicit parameters can be overwritten. These are just values that I just declared here. Fuchs and Sux declared here are just ideally what values they could be. Because of course 10 and 9, I'm just using the variables themselves. I didn't say that Fuchs is necessarily 9 here, right? I didn't say it's plus or equals to 9. I didn't say Sux is, or I didn't say plus or equals to 10, or I didn't say Sux was plus or equals to 9 here. So again, you can always modify the explicit parameters even though you declare them inside the original function. So that is also very important to consider here. So for example, if I said 9 and 10 here, my list, all of these, so Fuchs and Sux would be switched around. So kind of a recap here, we went over import, some techniques of import as well to kind of make our code more easier to read and more concise. And also I went over some of the basics of functions. And I also did go over some of aspects of for loops as well as my lists, or I did go over some concepts in for loops as well as lists, how to kind of traverse through lists, and also how to use the for loop. And I also mentioned that with explicit parameters we can use them, but they can also be overwritten when we actually call our function and we use new values as parameters. So I did go over a lot here. Of course, feel free to let me know if you guys have any questions. But until then, thank you guys so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video. But until then, I will see you guys in the next one.